If Ukraine does not survive, the United Nations will not survive. Have no illusions.
Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to welcome you today to the 12th installment in our wartime lecture series. And today, this series is brought to you by School for Policy Analysis of Kyiv Mahila Academy, Alumni Association of Kyiv Mahila Academy, and sponsored or supported by our partners from Justus Liebig University in Gießen. I'm Anna Osipchuk, I'm Research Director of School for Policy Analysis, and it's my great pleasure today to welcome Olександра Матвійчук, who is the human rights lawyer and the head of Center for Civil Liberties. And this center got a Nobel Prize for Peace last year. And I want to thank Olександра for very important work you've been doing and your center have been doing in documenting the crimes and in war crimes in this war. And I guess we'll talk very much about that and other related topics. So without further ado, I'll give the floor to you, please.
Thank you very much for providing me a floor. It's a huge honor for me to address to this distinguished audience. I will start with that point that the Russian large-scale invasion, which started in February last year, changed completely everything which we name as the normal life. And I would like to, I would ask to show the first slide from PowerPoint presentation. And this is the home with a yellow kitchen with some apples on the table, which and we see the result of Russian attack to the residential building in Dnipro. And I have a feeling that our life of millions of people in Ukraine now see like this yellow kitchen. This is something which become the daily life of millions of Ukrainians, and this is something which present every minute. Because even people who live in deep rear live in total uncertainty. We have never known when the next air alarm started or when internet will disappear. I live in Kiev, and my native city recently been shelled by Russian rockets. And I would like to tell the story of one Kiev family who left city after a large-scale invasion started in order to save their child life. And they moved to the city in deep rear, it's Vinnytsia, but Russians hit the city as well. Please, next slide. And their 4-year-old daughter Lisa died because there is no safe place in Ukraine anymore where you can hide from the Russian rockets. It's very important to say that this horror which we see for current moment is a deliberate horror. Like Russia uses war crimes as the methods of warfare. Russia tried to break people resistance and occupy Ukraine by the tool which I call the immense pain on civilian population. And we document this pain. It's not just a violation of Geneva or Hague conventions. It's a human suffering when Russian troops deliberately shelling residential buildings, schools, churches, hospitals, attack evacuation corridors, manage filtration camp systems, organize forcible deportations, provide forcible adoption of Ukrainian children, and brought up, re-educated their children as Russians. And we recorded rapes, murders, tortures, abductions, and other kinds of offenses against civilians. And this is deliberate policy, as I mentioned, and that is why Russians are so cruel to civilian population. I would like to show the next slide, please. And this is photo was made by my friend who worked recently in Kherson region in liberated territories, and the names of this dog is Zhulik, and Zhulik also suffered from Russian brutality. You can see that Russians cut the letter Z on his nose. Letter Z is a mark of so-called special military operation. This is why how Russians named this war against Ukraine. But what I want to emphasize, I want to remind that this war started not in February 2022, but in February 2014, when Ukraine obtained the chance for the quick democratic transformations after collapse of authoritarian regime due to a revolution of dignity. And in order to stop us on this way, Russia started this war of aggression, and Russia occupied Crimea, part of Lugansk and Donetsk regions, and conducted this war for all these 8 years, and last year extended to the large-scale invasion. And this is very important to remind, because this clearly shows the roots of this war. Putin started this war not because he is afraid of NATO. Putin started this war because he is afraid of the idea of freedom, which come closer to the Russian borders. And in this regard, this is not a war between two states, Russia and Ukraine. This is a war between two systems, authoritarianism and democracy. And Putin tried to convince Ukrainians that we made the wrong choice 9 years ago when we, after Revolution of Dignity, started to build society where the rights of everybody are protected. And Putin also tried to convince the whole world that rule of law, democracy, human rights, and freedom are fake values because they couldn't protect you during the war. And he tried to convince the whole world that a state with a strong military potential and nuclear weapon can violate international order, can dictate their rules of the game, and even forcibly change internationally recognized state borders. And that is why I would like to focus our lecture on this value dimension of this war and speak about justice and peace, justice and law, justice and international system, justice and democratic transformation, and justice and people during our lecture. First, when we speak about justice and peace, I would like to remind that Ukraine desires peace more than anyone else. But peace doesn't come when the country which was invaded stops fighting. It will be not a peace, it will be occupation. And occupation is just another form of the war. I know what I tell because we have been documenting war crimes for 9 years already. And I know for sure that people in occupied territories live in gray zone. They have no tools how to protect themselves, their rights, their freedom, their property, their lives, and their beloved ones. Next slide, please. This is a photo of unmarked graves in the forest near Izum in liberated Kharkiv region. And the dead body of children writer Volodymyr Vakulenko was found in this grave under the number 319. Volodymyr Vakulenko wrote stories for children, and the whole generations of Ukrainian children brought up with his daddy's book. During the Russian occupation, Volodymyr disappeared, and his family to the last hoped that he is alive, but as thousands of other Ukrainian civilians was in Russia captivity, and it was very hard for them to accept the result of identification. So Russians killed children writer Volodymyr Vakulenko in Kherson region, in Kharkiv region, because he has pro-Ukrainian sympathy. Russians killed Ukrainian conductor and musicians Yuri Kerpatenko in Kherson region because he refused to play in so-called musical concert. Russians killed Ruslan Nechiparenko and injured his son in Bucha when he tried to find the medicine and humanitarian assistance for their family. For nothing. They killed Ruslan Nechiparenko just because they can. And I would like to remind that all these people were unarmed. So occupation is not alternative, it's also horrible. And that is why we have to go deeply into details, and we will see the same pattern of Russian behavior in other conflicts. Russian troops committed horrible war crimes in Chechnya, in Moldova, in Georgia, in Mali, in Syria, in Libya, in other countries of the world. And they have never been punished for this. They believe they can do whatever they want, and this impunity resulted in situation that violence and denial of human dignity become a part of Russian culture. And that is why we will have no sustainable peace in our region without justice. We must break this circle of impunity, this way of thinking and perceiving the world and what is normal in this world. Because in our part of the world, Russia for decades uses the war as a tool how to achieve their geopolitical interests, and uses war crimes as the tool how to win this war. Next slide, please. This photo was taken not in Ukraine. It was made during Balkans War. And you can see the Serbian military who tried to kick a senior woman lying on the ground with two men in civilian clothes, and there is a pool of blood under them, and it looks like that all these people are dead. 31 years passed, and journalists decided to make their investigation about this story, and they use open data sources and new digital instruments, and they identified this man on the photo. And it turned that he has never been punished, and he made a career as a DJ and still performs in clubs and festivals. What I want to say with this photo, that modern technologies allows us to document war crimes that we couldn't even dream 31 years ago. Ordinary people has access to different digital instruments, Google Street Maps, Google Lens. We can, without even special knowledge, very easy to check the sources of photo and video. And if we speak about people who participated in the events with a ordinary smartphone, they can make very important photos and videos which provide a lot of information about situation, what's happened. Now we can recreate a picture of events and identify the war criminals without even being on the spot. And the brilliant work of Bellingcat and other human rights organizations is convincingly proof that it's possible. So our digital technologists provide us a lot of new opportunities to track each personal story. But unfortunately, international criminal justice can't boast so rapidly as digital technologies. And next categories which I want to say, it's about justice and law. I think that the problem that our law is not so transferred rapidly as digital technologies is not just some geopolitical interest, but also some problems and with way of thinking of which people have and our prejudice. Because we're still looking to the world into the prisma of Nuremberg trials. I will remind you that last century, the civilized world made a significant step to establish law and justice. And on Nuremberg trials, the Nazi war criminals were tried, but after Nazi regime had collapsed. But we live in a new century, and justice must be independent of the magnitude of Putin's regime's power. That is why we cannot wait how the war will end. We must establish a special tribunal now and hold Putin, Lukashenko, and others guilty of the crime of aggression accountable. Why I emphasize particularly on the crime of aggression? Because unfortunately there is no international court for current moment who have a jurisdiction to prosecute the top official of political leadership and high military command of Russian Federation for this crime. Even International Criminal Court has no jurisdiction over crime of aggression when we speak about situation of Russian war against Ukraine. And this is a clear gap of accountability because national courts can't overcome the immunity which top officials of each state has according international law. That is why we have to establish special tribunal on aggression, because all these war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide, which is now committed in Ukraine, is a result of some leadership decision of initiating, planning and starting this war of aggression. But when we speak about justice and law, I see also another problem. And I can frame this problem in that way that war turns people into the numbers because the scale of war crimes grows so large that it's become impossible to recognize all the stories. And only justice can return people their names. That is why if we have now the digital technologies which provide us a possibility to track the whole story, we have to develop the law architecture to make it possible for hundreds of thousands of victims of this war to achieve justice. It's not normal to prioritize some crimes or some victims because each lives are matters and we have to provide justice for all people regardless who they are, their social position, the type of crime they endured, and whether or not media is interested in their cases. Next slide, please. When we speak about justice and international system, I would like to say several words about problems which we face and not only Ukraine faced, but the example of Ukraine is a very bright example that international system of peace and security aren't worked. and that established in the last century by victorious states after the Second World War. The system provides unjustified preferences to the individual countries, and now we are in a situation that permanent member of UN Security Council, which was created to prevent the war, started the war of aggression, and the whole UN system couldn't stop Russian atrocities. And this is a challenge not only for Ukraine, but for the whole world, because we will not be able to restore international order and prove that we can solve the problem with the legal matters, other countries start to think that only military forces or nuclear power is a guarantee of human rights defense and the security of their citizens. So now we have a question, how better to protect the life of people with the legal tools or with physical force? Do we as a humankind are able to develop the international system which can effectively defend people against authoritarian regimes and wars, regardless of the fact whether or not they live in a country with a strong military potential? And I think that it's a crucial question for our century. And we must start the reform of international system of peace and security. And it's a question how it has to be done, but what is important for me and for my colleagues from human rights organization, that this new system has to be based on human rights. Because for decades, we saw how human rights wasn't a factor for taking political decisions. And we totally aware that human rights progress and peace are inextricably linked. And that is why human rights has to be on the same level importance when we take political decisions as economical benefits or security issue. And this approach has to be demonstrated not just in internal policy, like well-developed democracy do, but also in external policy as well. What we can say about justice and rebuilding process? It's very difficult to speak about rebuilding of Ukraine while the war is in a hot stage, but it will be too late to speak about rebuilding when the war will end. And because of total destruction of the country by Russia, especially after this winter, when Russia tried to destroy the whole civil infrastructure in order to deprive millions of Ukrainians from water, food, electricity, internet, light, and other basic human facilities. That is why when people speak about rebuilding, they first thinking about restoration of bridges, roads, residential buildings, hospitals, and civil infrastructure. And this is very important, but people who affected by this war has to be priority of rebuilding process as well. But also, when we speak about rebuilding, it's very important to speak about reconstruction of democracy and strengthening of democratic institutions, which underwent additional human rights restrictions due to the security requirements during the martial law. And victory for Ukraine is not just to push Russian troops out from the Ukrainian territory and the occupied Crimea and other oblasts, but also to achieve success in democratic transitions. And this is the victory for Ukraine. So Ukrainians are very ambitious in our goal setting. But when we speak about democratic transitions, it's not enough to adopt qualities law and build new formal institutions, because non-formal values of society always prevail than formal institutions and laws. And we need some type of energy of people to make these laws and institutions work properly. And I mean, when I speak about energy, the belief of people that democracy is working, rule of law is essential, and justice is possible, even though delayed in time. Without this belief, it will be very difficult for country to go through the period of democratic transition. And this energy of people is preconditions for the quantitative leap, which help us as a country to escape of the zone of transitions in which we're stuck for decades. And that is why we can say that justice for the Russian war crimes is a precondition for democratic transformation of Ukraine, as well as on the same level as other important factors. And we have proof in sociology. Last year, the sociological survey was conducted, and Ukrainians were asked, what will be the main disappointment for you after the war will end? And a majority of people, 65%, answered that the main disappointment for them will be impunity for Russian war crimes. So we can clearly state that it's demand of millions of people for justice, and we have to respond to this demand in a legal way, because if not, this demand for justice can easily transform to demand for revenge or to some other things, which can contradict with the general vector of Euro-integration. And last thing which I want to emphasize in during this lecture, it's about justice and people. In this war with Russia, we are fighting for a freedom in all senses. We are fighting for a freedom to be independent state, but not Russian colony. We are fighting for a freedom to be Ukrainians, preserve our Ukrainian identity, and not to be forcibly re-educated as Russians. And we are fighting for a freedom to have our democratic choice, like a chance to build our country where the rights of everybody are protected, government is accountable, judiciary is independent, and police do not beat students who are peacefully demonstrating. And we are paying a rather high price for this chance. So when we speak about people, I must say that as a human rights lawyer, I have been applying the law to defend people and human dignity for years. And at present, I and other Ukrainian human rights colleagues found ourselves in a situation when the law doesn't work. As I mentioned in previous chapters, the whole UN system couldn't stop Russian atrocities. But what I know from my own experience, that even when you can't rely upon legal instruments, you can always rely upon people. And I would never wish any nation to go through our experience, because it's horrible. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide, please. And the last slide. Like this slide with destructions and pure human emotion illustrates that it's very difficult times, and if we have a chance to avoid it, we will. We would like to avoid it, but we can't choose the country in which we are born. We can't choose the time in which we are born. We can only choose our position to the challenges which we face. And I must admit that these dramatic times provide Ukrainians a possibility to express our best features, and to be courageous, to fight for freedom, to make difficult but right choices, and to help each other. And this wave of solidarity which united the whole country make ordinary people do extraordinary things. And like I see how people in different fields start to do something which they even not expected from themselves, and they naturally rescue their lives in order to save others whom they never met before. And during this time, we are totally aware what does it mean to be a human beings. And this means that we are fighting for something which have no limitation in national borders. And not just human pain is such a thing. Justice is such a thing as well, because justice is universal value. And if it's universal value, it has to be a universal service. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alexandra, for this very important message, I think, to everyone of us in the world. I think it's also important for our international audience. But if I may just remind to our audience that you may post questions to the comments section, either on YouTube or on Facebook, please do. But while I listened to you, I actually wanted to ask several questions. I know that probably you yourself and a lot of my colleagues and myself, for the last month or two, we've been taking part in so many discussions on international level about why land for peace is unacceptable for Ukraine. And these arguments that you provided today play a huge role in this demand for justice and the stories of atrocities and occupied territories. It does, I think, get to people as a strong message why it is not acceptable. But at the same time, what is also often discussed is actually something I want to ask you. The number of crimes that is perpetrated by Russia, the number of people involved in these atrocities on Russia's side is so huge that it's actually posed a question whether it is even possible to prosecute every one of them. If we are not talking about top officials, but if we're going to every last soldier or person involved in the crime, who is a perpetrator of a crime, how we actually get them to be punished or to be prosecuted, even, because I doubt the courts ever dealt with such a big numbers. What would be a solution?
It's a very good question, because it's not the first war which resulted in numerous human pain, and it was a common understanding that war seems horrible, but when you have a huge amount of people suffering, unfortunately, a lot of them will remain without chance for justice. And because it needs enormous resources to investigate each story and try to prosecute perpetrators of each concrete person. And it was like this for a lot of years. But why I mentioned about new possibilities which digital technologies provides. Now we speak with one American university and they have access to the satellite image. Can you imagine that like ordinary human rights organization in cooperation with this university can get access to this images to see, for example, the size of mass graves in the occupied territories, or to have access to information of how each seconds Mariupol under the Russian fire was changed. So now, like, it's possible. We have much more opportunities to change this sad norma which was prevails in previous years. And what we have to do in order to achieve it, it's not the goal to, like, we will not start with the goal to prosecute perpetrators. We have the goal to provide chance for justice for victims. And this is essential goal, because when we speak about justice, different victims see this justice in different way. For some people, justice means that their perpetrators has to be under the bars. For another victims, justice means that they have to receive compensations, and without compensations, they will feel disappointed. For another part of victims, justice means that they need to be heard, or they want to understand what's happened with their beloved ones. They want to know the truth, or they want to have a legal decision that something which happened with them or their beloved ones is not just immoral, it's illegal. So they need such kind of recognition. So justice is can have different aspects. And that is why, in order to achieve this expectation, if we speak about victim-central approach, we have to establish a complex strategy of justice and with different components. How to strengthen the ability of International Criminal Court to because International Criminal Court would limit investigation only to several selected cases. How to strengthen the ability of national system, which have the main burden of responsibility. How to use international element and to ingrain this international element into national system on the level of investigation and prosecution, to be able to effectively investigate 67,000 criminal proceedings which currently officially registered by Office of General Prosecutor. How to use the universal jurisdiction norms by other countries. How to redesign the new emerged bodies like Joint Investigative Team to work not only in the countries of their members, but in Ukraine, where the crimes are committed. How to create a special tribunal on aggression to fill this gap. And we can add a new components of this complex justice strategy. But what I want to say that we have put it as our goal, because like what we see from the past history, that justice wasn't the priority. And because people say Russia is a big country, we have to deal with Russia in future. Let's try to solve this conflict in some way. And as you mentioned, Ukraine has given up their people and put them for torture and death on the occupied territories as a so-called political compromise. And I want to say that if we start to think that justice is an important goal, we will find the answer how to achieve this.
Thank you very much. There is a question from Lisa Menshikova. I will read it, but it's on your screen also. How should human rights organizations transform to show more potency than they are shown through the year of invasion? And also the second question, how do you think if there is a future for the UN?
It's a good two questions. Our human rights organization are famous in Ukraine because of our ability to involve ordinary people into human rights work. And I think that this has to be the main direction of transformation. The challenge which we face are so huge that we will never succeed with our human rights teams. We have to rely upon on the mass mobilization of people. And that is why in order to do it, the human rights organizations have to change their priorities, their communication, their management, even their structure, in order to provide a very easy entry point for ordinary people to join their work and, if I can say, the fight for justice. Because we are not working in the human rights field, we are fighting in human rights field. It's not something which guaranteed. It's a real struggle. And how I see the future of the UN, I really don't know, because now I see how international organizations reacted to the Russian war, large-scale invasion, and we witnessed the same as our colleagues from Syria witnessed before. For example, we witnessed how international organizations evacuated their personnel when the large-scale invasion started. And this was a very sad signal, because the lot of human rights and humanitarian mandates were created deliberately to be with people in such conditions. But for decades, they elaborated a lot of procedures and rules. And now these procedures and rules become more important than the initial goal for which they were created. So I think it's a time for rethinking the role and senses of international organizations. I am a fan of idea of international organizations. I'm not against them, as Putin, for example, is, but I do believe that they have to be in line with the challenges of current times. And in order to be in line, they need to go through cardinal changes and reforms.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for this answer. And probably to continue this topic you mentioned, and I find that a very important thought, that it's very important to start working now in not just in collecting evidence, and but you mentioned that we can't wait for the end of the war. Does that mean that also the cases should go to court before the end of the war, and the decision probably made before the end of the war?
Sure, but it depends on the difficulties of investigation, because they have not to be deadline, but just internal quality of investigation is such deadline, whether or not the materials are ready to be sent to the court. And but I do believe that we have to start the special tribunal on aggression now. I think it's very long logic and very wrong signal to say, let's wait how the war will end, because, okay, so what we will say with such position? When Ukraine will win, then we will punish Russian leaders for the war of aggression, which they clearly committed. or if Ukraine not win, so we will close our eyes for international law, which was developed after the Second World War, and try to perceive that nothing happened. Now we speak not just about Ukraine, we speak about how the world will be developed. And if we will not be able to restore international orders, example of Russia will inspire another authoritarian leaders to do the same. So I know that there is a temptation not to solve the difficult problems and maybe wait when they vanish. But the truth is that problems will not vanish. They become just more and more serious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. I think it's very important, and I think what is also important, and I think a lot of people in Ukraine are not thinking about that because we are very much focused on our story, but this precedent that will set for the world, and that our case is important not just for us but for the future cases, other cases or other countries. I think this is very important, and it's great that you bring it up. But I also, to continue, I have a question. But do you think it's possible, or if there is a political will needed to actually start the cases against the leaders and elites now?
There are a lot of fear on the international level, but political will, it's something which it things which can be generated. Mm-hmm. And mass mobilization of people in different countries can generate such political will. And that is why we now try to work directly with our colleagues in other countries and with people in other countries as well to build the horizontal networks and horizontal connections. When I tell about war crimes which we documented in Ukraine, this pain and the level of cruelty is very understandable to all people, regardless who they are, what's their citizenship, what's their social position, what's their ideology, political views, religions, etc. Because when we speak about international crimes, we speak about atrocities. We speak about something which harm the idea of existence of humankind as a species. And that is why it's very understandable for all people around the world that such things has to be stopped, and people who commit such things has to be prosecuted. And once again, this war have different dimensions and value dimension as well. And if we manage to unite people in different countries to speak in one voice about demand for justice, we can generate such political will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much. And there is a question from Sofia Kosarevich. Miss Alexandra, thank you for such an informative presentation. My question is, in your opinion, which aspects, spheres of international law have to be changed in order for justice to be served?
It's questions which lead to one more lecture, but I will try to be brief. We have first to change a lot of norms in international conventions. For example, if I speak about third convention, Geneva Convention about prisoners of the war, now we have not just paper letters, we have digital letters which can be sent by emails. Of course, it's very funny to speak about it when Russia violates all existing norms of Third Geneva Convention, but if we speak about generally what has to be changed, we have to rethink some norms and of existing conventions, and we have to establish a new norms about cyber field, about environment field, about culture field, etc., which is lack for current moment. Also, we have to develop the International Criminal Court. Like, it's a huge problem that International Criminal Court has no jurisdiction over the crime of aggression. And this is because of the member states of Rome Statute, when they agreed on Kampala meeting, they made very abstract definition what is aggression is. And this is not about law, it's totally about politics. So we have to push this state to open the way for International Criminal Court to work with this kind of crimes. Also, we have to change our approach to international criminal justice as well, because it's not okay that it takes for decades and people died without being witness a result of these proceedings. Our world become more quick, and that is why we have to bring the speed, not to lose in quality, to the international criminal justice procedures as well. And I think we have to change a lot of general perceptions, as I mentioned, that we have to provide justice for all people, and I believe that now it become more possible, and we have to start to do it. We have to name the things what they are. For example, it's not okay that in Convention on Genocide, like there is a very strict terms of the genocide and activities which can be qualified as genocide, because it's common sense. You haven't to be a lawyer to understand that in order to totally or partially destroy some national ethnic group, it's not necessary to kill them all. You can change forcibly their identity of this group, and the whole group will disappear. And this is also a form of genocide. So such perceptions has also to be changed.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I have another question on a different probably matter. In a lot of investigations, it's been in use at least, that in a lot of investigation of mass burials and massacre sites, if I may use this word, international teams have been brought to help Ukrainian teams. Do you think it's important, or how important do you think this involvement of international forensic teams and probably criminologists into this story?
I mentioned that for current moment, Ukrainian Office of General Prosecutor officially registered 67,000 criminal proceedings. And we work directly with victims, and we see that Ukrainian system is overloaded. It's completely stuck. I not criticize national law enforcement bodies. It's impossible for the best office of general prosecutor in the world effectively investigated each of 67,000 proceedings during the war. And that is why we need international assistance, and not just with consultancy. I use this metaphor that when you have a car without petrol, you can hire the best driver in the world, but the car will not move because they have no petrol. And a lot of things Ukrainians are not do, not because we are not know that the things has to be done, but because we are lack of qualified working hands. And we need international detectives, international prosecutors, international judges to work together with us, like a hybrid internationalized mechanism as a model where national judges work together with international judges, national prosecutors work together with international prosecutors. And this is something which we have to ask from international community. All assistance which we achieve in this regard is temporary. In April last year, France sent to Ukraine France gendarmerie to work in Kiev region. But it was only in Kiev region. It was only about forensic expertise, which is important, but investigation is not just forensic expertise. And it was temporarily. And when Ukraine liberated Kharkiv region, my colleague, the editor of one of the biggest internet media in Ukraine, had to volunteer in the morgues, not because he is forensic specialist, but because nobody were there to help with this task.
Mm-hmm. Just a short follow-up or to continue a bit, but I do understand and get this lack of capacity on the Ukrainian part, because the amount of cases that you mentioned is overwhelmingly huge. But do you think that the involvement and we hope it will happen, and the international assistance will be provided. But do you think it also will add to this trust in the justice to be found, or it doesn't really matter who will do the investigation for people?
We know the answer to this question. Mm-hmm. The recent sociological surveys show that Ukrainians want to see international specialists as a part of investigation. They have trust to international specialists.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you very much. There is it's such a big topic that there is a lot of questions yet to be asked, but I guess we are running a bit out of time. We're almost an hour today, and I just want to thank you again and thank everyone who listened to us today. And we hope that there will be justice for every victim and everyone for this war in Ukraine.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Alexandra.
If Ukraine does not survive, the United Nations will not survive. Have no illusions.